What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Took a day off yesterday, but I wanted to jump into the Miami Pro Day yesterday, of course, in which Joe Judge was in attendance. And it's been a common pattern for the New York Giants. May have another video up today as well for you guys, but it's been a common pattern for Joe Judge and the New York Giants here over the start of this, draft process to be going to pro days of prospects that are thought to be first-round draft prospects on the defensive side of the football, specifically at the edge rusher / linebacker position with Micah Parsons, who many feel may be the best edge rusher in this draft class. I'm pretty sure they went to the Georgia Pro Day as well, which had Olajari, who started to move up draft charts. I know they went to Penn State's Pro Day, which of course has Micah Parsons. And then yesterday, they went to another Pro Day in Miami, in which Joe Judge was once again in attendance, that had Greg Rousseau and Jaelan Phillips, both of who are projected to go in the first round. In addition to that, it also had Quincy Roche, who is a third or potentially fourth-round draft prospect, who actually opened some eyes yesterday. But it begs the question, are the New York Giants entertaining taking an edge rusher at 11, or potentially if they're able to trade down out of that pick? And you could certainly argue, if you look at this defense, that is probably the missing link at this point in time. You obviously have great corner play now, you have strong safeties, and you have a pretty strong defensive line. With all that being said, yes, we could definitely use a dominant edge rusher. The first question I asked, though, by all accounts, this is not a rich edge rusher draft class, specifically in the first round. You look at Jaelan Phillips, of course, the athletic ability is there. You're talking about a guy, and we're going to jump into some of the 40 numbers and all that in a second. You're talking about a guy who was the number 1 rated prospect in all of high school football going into college in the country. Not at his position, overall. He then attended UCLA, but what you worry about him is his injury history. And I think it is way too big of a gamble, in my personal opinion, even taking the first round, let alone number 11. The guy was medically retired from football, whatever that means. He had 3 concussions while at UCLA and had a significant wrist damage with another injury. I think that is way too big of a risk to be taking at 11, no matter how high this upside may be for this prospect. You're talking about a guy that if he suffers another bad concussion, may have to retire within a year or two of his professional career. I am not willing to take that gamble if I'm an NFL GM. Now, maybe the New York Giants are going there to evaluate him as a potential second-round pick. Who knows? But there may be a team that's willing to take that gamble. As far as Greg Rousseau goes, in my opinion, he was underwhelming. In my opinion, he's somewhat overrated. I've watched a ton of film breakdowns of Rousseau. A lot of his pressure came in the interior, wasn't even on the edge. And his technique is just not that impressive. He kind of, outstrengths the offensive lineman, which is going to be much harder for him to do at the NFL level. Now, that's not to say if Patrick Graham looks at him and maybe he says, wow, I can really get something out of this guy with his build and his height. But the speed doesn't blow you out of the water, and we're going to go into those numbers as well. I'm also going to touch on the offensive line and some of the things that Bill Polian had to say, as well as an article that was written in the New York Post as to whether or not the New York Giants will address it in this year's draft early, something that I think is imperative for this football team. And I'm going to go over some of the numbers for you guys as well. Now, I completely understand that the Giants invested 3 picks last year in the draft in that offensive line. They also addressed Will Hernandez's pick in the second round in 2018. And some fans may look at that and they may say, give these guys time to grow. But how much longer are we willing to give these guys time to grow before we start to realize that we need to get more talent on the offensive line? Now, of course, the New York Giants did bring in Rob Sale, who a lot of people may feel may bolster this offensive line this year. And if he does, and we don't make a huge splash in terms of the draft at the position, he deserves a world of credit for how poor this offensive line performed last year, specifically in the first half. The one thing I will say, they got much better, as we all know, once Joe Judge stepped in, even though they did struggle in some games down the stretch, specifically the Arizona Cardinals game. But it definitely got much better, and hopefully they could grow off of that and get better. The offensive line in this offensive system is also more important than most teams, being that the Eric Oriel system, you're looking to take shots down the field. Daniel Jones last year ranked 19th in terms of time to throw. That's also factoring in his mobility and his ability to extend plays. So it may have even been worse than that. Despite only having the 26th most passing attempts in football, he only had about 2.75 seconds to throw per throw. Not to mention the New York Giants sack totals were ridiculous, but we'll get further into that as we go along with the video. First, I wanted to pull up the stats from the Miami Pro Day. This coming from Jim Nagy. We're not going to worry about Brevin Jordan, the tight end prospect. We're going to look at Jaelan Phillips, Quincy Roche, and Greg Rousseau. Phillips ran a 4.56, weighing at 260-something pounds his first time around. Rousseau ran a 4.71, which was a little bit underwhelming 4.74 second time around. Now he's a big man. As far as Roche goes, he actually surprised and ran a faster 40 time than that of Greg Rousseau at 4.68, which is why I kind of have my eye on him as a third or fourth round potential draft prospect. Then, as far as the broad jump goes, once again, Rousseau placed dead last. Jaelan Phillips, 10.5. Roche with a 9.11, and Greg Rousseau at 9.7. But like I said, due to the injury concerns with Jaelan Phillips and some of the stats I'm going to provide you guys with after I go over all these notes, I'm not taking him in the first round. And the same for Greg Rousseau. I just don't think, in my personal opinion, the upside is there. Now, going into the offensive line before we circle back to some of the statistics that I want to talk to you guys about. This from a New York Post article written by Schwartz talking to a source from within the organization. They love their line, the source said. They really think they can ride and die with that line. They think Matt Barrett is extremely talented, and hopefully he is. Other tidbits from the source. The coaching staff is high on Lemieux. Thrilled with the energy he brought on the field. The coaching staff has not given up on Hernandez, but he needs to prove himself. I think the only guy they don't love is Will, the source said. They do not think he's a bad player. They just aren't sure if he should be a starter. So maybe they're entertaining guard, but potentially, or center, and shifting Gates over to the guard, but maybe potentially in the second round, which I wouldn't cry about. I think they definitely need to address an offensive line within one of the first two rounds, and I will continue to say I think it is the biggest need of this team. Now, like I said, if you're in love with Devontae Smith and he's there, I'll completely support it. Then, goes on to say this. Here's what the Giants say. They're going to live with their rookies, and they like their third-round pick at right tackle. An NFL source with knowledge of the Giants' thinking told the Post. So if they like Matt Barrett, would that mean that they would shy away from drafting a guy like Rashawn Slater? We're going to have to wait and see. Of course, they could place Slater at the guard, and if Barrett does not work out, they could shift him over. Then Bill Polian goes on to say this. Unless they get that solved, talking about the offensive line, the weapons won't mean a thing. The 78-year-old Polian said the week on the Colin Cowherd podcast. I'm pretty sure Polian, I think, was the general manager for the Colts. They have got to protect him, and they've got to be able to block for the run. That's job one. And I suspect they'll address that in the draft. And I tend to agree with them. I do not agree with the mock drafters and the people that are coming out and saying that the Giants will take an edge rusher in the first round. Or probably even the second. Potentially the second. But I do not think it'll be a first round pick. I think the first round will either be an offensive lineman or a wide receiver. And I'm going to get further into my reasoning right now. As far as the edge rusher goes, yes. Is it a need? Absolutely. Do we have a dominant edge rusher? Absolutely not. But I continue to say that I don't think this scheme calls for it. That doesn't mean that it won't help. Of course, the more talent you get at positions, the better it could be. But is it a luxury that the New York Giants could afford at this point in time based on how poor their offense performed last year? And we're going to get further into the offense, but first we're going to start with the defense. Last year, the defense was top 10 in terms of an overall unit. In terms of getting after the quarterback, the Giants are not nearly as bad as some people make them out to be. Last year, despite quarterbacks only throwing the 23rd most times in football, which obviously tells you, well, the Giants had, one of the bottom 10 in terms of opportunities to sack the quarterback, because the quarterbacks only threw the 23rd most times against the New York Giants. The Giants ranked 13th in sacks. The Giants, a scheme that depends on the blitz, only blitzed 20 fewest times in football. They ranked 20th in blitz percentage last year, mainly due to the fact that they did not have a good second corner, something that they addressed in free agency, which I think will allow the Giants to send the blitz more often and get more pressure on the quarterback this year, even though they were pretty good last year. They were 10th in pressure percentage and 6th in knockdown percentage. So with all that said, is it as big of a need as people make it out to be? In my personal opinion, no. I think the defense is going to be good whether or not we draft an edge rusher, and in a draft class where the edge rusher position is thought to be kind of thin, at least early on in the draft, I personally think it is not the best of ideas, not to mention you should be getting back O'Shane Ximines and Lorenzo Carter, and you had a number of rookies at that position last year that you would hope would only grow and get better. Am I against drafting an edge rusher in this draft? Absolutely not. I think we could definitely use some more talent there, but am I doing it in the first round? No, not me personally. I think it would be a reach at 11, and I think we have more pressing needs, and that's now going to turn myself to the offensive side of the football. And again, maybe Rob Sale can improve this. Maybe with a better offensive line coach, maybe more growth from the younger players on this offensive line, it will improve it. But if you look at the offensive line last year, and if you really look at the offensive line over Daniel Jones' first 2 years, it's as bad as it's ever been in terms of sacks allowed. And maybe some of that could go on Daniel Jones for sure, especially in his rookie year. But last year, Daniel Jones was sacked, I think it was 45 times. He's been sacked 83 times overall in only 26 starts. Not to mention, he's missed 4 games in his first 2 years, 2 games per season. Quarterback's been injured. You would think that the New York Giants would try to prioritize making sure they could keep him as healthy as possible. We all know that Eli Manning did not miss a game in his entire career. Some will absolutely point to the fact that it's a bit fluky, being that the offensive line was not good over the second half of his career. But regardless, Jones has missed time his first 2 years in the NFL, so that has to be factored in as well. He's been sacked 83 times in just 26 starts, Daniel Jones. 83 times in 26 starts. To put that in perspective, he's being sacked 3.3 times per start since being in the NFL. Eli Manning, over the course of his career, his worst season, he was sacked 47 times in 2018. 47 times, which works out to be just under 3 times per game, which is lower in his worst season than Daniel Jones so far over the course of his career on average in 26 starts at 3.3 times per game. Eli Manning never approached that number as a quarterback in his 15 or 16-year career in the NFL. So, like I said, maybe some of that goes to Jones, but a lot of it certainly goes to the offensive line. He was also 19th, as I said, I think earlier in the video, in terms of time to throw last year. There were only 3 quarterbacks that had over 3 seconds to throw last year. One was Jalen Hurts, a lot due to his mobility and a limited sample size. The other 2 were the 2 quarterbacks that took a huge leap that Giants fans frequently hope and want to compare Daniel Jones to this offseason. One being Josh Allen, which I think is far-fetched. The other being Baker Mayfield, which I think is more realistic. Both of them had over 3 seconds to throw, and those were the only 3 quarterbacks that did that. I don't think it's a coincidence that both Josh Allen and Baker Mayfield took a huge leap in year 3. The Browns obviously made it a priority to address that offensive line, as did the Bills over the 2nd and 3rd years of Josh Allen's career. If it's me, and you ask me what the New York Giants' biggest need is, I don't even think it's close. I think it's the offensive line. That doesn't mean they'll take them in the first. Maybe they'll feel they can't pass up on a weapon, and maybe they'll go in the 2nd round. But do I believe the people that are coming out and saying that they are in love with their offensive line and they don't think they need to tinker with it at all? I do not. How do you justify that, being that you gave up the 31st most sacks in football last year? Being that Daniel Jones did not have a ton of time to throw the football? Yes, some of it could definitely be, you could definitely look at it, maybe with getting Saquon Barkley back and adding Kenny Golladay, it'll help out the offensive line. That's all well and good. But I definitely think there's more talent that needs to be added to that unit. Maybe it'll be in the 1st, maybe it'll be in the 2nd, but I expect an offensive lineman to be drafted relatively early for the New York Giants. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.